And he's an award-winning British comedian who created a magazine that celebrates Atlantic Canada, and it's called the Maritime Edit. You can get the summer edition now. James Mullinger joining us on Canada Now. Hey, James, good to see you, man.
You too, Jeff. It is the highlight of each season is, for me,
really?
this moment with you.
It's talking about the edition of the magazine, not putting it out. It's talking about it with me.
Well, that's true. I mean, and that is absolutely true because I love you. B, I love your show.
Thank you.
C, we always have so much fun.
Yeah.
But also, it's a weird thing when you go from like producing a magazine in London where you're surrounded with people constantly to then producing one in your home in a rural part of New Brunswick with no one but your wife to confer with. It's a weird thing because so you print it and then you spend months working on it, you put it out there, and then obviously, you know the subscribers are hopefully enjoying it, but really it is a deafening silence. So this is the first time that I actually get to feel like I'm in an industry and a normal life when we get to do this.
You get feedback. On how, but I'll tell you, you have such a wonderful group of people aside from you and your wife working on this issue, just brilliant people, and I am so all in on your mag. I've been fortunate enough to have a piece of my own in the mag, and thank you for that opportunity once again. That was back in the spring edition, but so many brilliant people that are working on this magazine, and yourself included, of course, and your wife. But the stories I love. Here's one thing I really love about you. Okay, you go out and you share your observations as a performer on stage, as a comedian. You're an actor as well, but you're so inquisitive and you're so curious. And I think it's your curious nature that I like the most about you. I really do, and it really comes across in this magazine. And it's not just with the pieces that you write or that you're involved with. I can see it in what you're including. I can hear you going, oh, that's got to be in the magazine. I got to hear about that. Oh, our readers need to know about this. And I feel that warm embrace every time I see another edition of the mag.
That's a really beautiful thing to say, man. I can't thank you enough. And like you say, thank you so much for writing a beautiful piece. It read beautifully. It looked beautiful. We had so much great feedback on it. And also, I mean, it created a friendship between myself and Christina Martin that didn't exist before that.
Yes.
You literally brought us together.
Yes.
So there's all these magical things. And I can't tell you how much that compliment means to me in that I feel like if there's one thing that my parents kind of gave me as a child, it was like when you like something, you shout about it. And again, it's not that I'm, it's not that I don't like, for example, cynical comedy or sarcasm, all those things. But in my comedy and in my writing and everything else I do, I like to celebrate things. Like, I don't like to sneer. And of course, I mean, people often say to me, like, is there anything you don't like? And it's like, yeah, there's tons of stuff I don't like. But there's just no point me wasting the energy dumping on something when there's so many things to celebrate out there. And I think my childhood was full of moments like this. Like, I have a picture on my wall, actually, of my mum being held up by all the garbage men from our neighborhood because she wrote an email to the local paper to say, I'd like to thank the garbage men because they know I've got a newborn baby at home, which is me. And I'd like, and they're really quiet because the bins were all tin then and being dragged along. She said they're really quiet and respectful. So the newspaper sent all the garbage men down and they lifted up my mum, and there's a picture of her being held up by a garbage guys. I mean, it does look a bit like a still from a porn movie, I'll be honest. Niche fetish. But it's so, to me, it's always that thing about wanting to highlight things. I love hearing that, and yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the pleasure that we have, is going to experience fun things and going, rather than saying who can we tell, it's like, oh, we've got outlets, and it might be on stage in comedic form, it might be in print in print form.
Would that adult movie, by the way, have been called Taking Out the Trash? Would that have been? No offense to your mom, that's not what I mean.
It would have been called Sweep Your Bitch Up. I bet there were movies with these two names. I'm allowed to say the B word on air in reference to a Prodigy song. I'm quoting a song title.
Yes. For reference, yes, we'll allow
perfect.
it. We'll allow
Perfect.
it.
Yes, I would never use it as it was. Yeah, if
Right.
anyone listening,
Yeah.
I would never use that word normally, other than when quoting apologies.
That's another reason why I love talking to you, because I never know where our conversation is going to go.
I know. Who knew that road sweeper porn would become a topic of conversation on this beautiful family show? But ultimately, this is what everything's always about having fun, having enjoying laughter, and again, crucially with my shows, it's like there's no. Even if a conversation, a joke can go a little bit one way, it's never anything other than from a place of love.
Like, place of love, anything. and for fun, absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk about some of what's included here in the summer edition of the Maritime Edit. The cover story, and you have a feature on a night walk experience in New Brunswick. And of course, you had to go and meet the masterminds behind it.
Of course, that's what we do, right?
Yeah,
and it's one of these things where these Acadie Lumina, immersive walks, these nighttime walks that have been very popular around. I believe they were conceived in Montreal, and they've been huge all over the world. But someone had the genius idea to bring one to Bucktouche, New Brunswick, to celebrate Acadian culture, and it's one of these things which. A certain contingent of people, and I think this is almost reflected across Canada. It's not just a Maritimes thing, but you can walk up to someone and say, "Hey, have you heard of Acadie Lumina?" And they'll go, 5 people might say yes, of course, but then 50 will say never heard of it. I've no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And this is always the fascinating thing with producing the magazine. Was early on, one of our remits was we don't want to include things that people already know about or might. But yeah, the very first issue, for instance, the cover story was Fogo Island Inn, which I assumed everyone would know that story. But we came out and everyone was saying to me, "Never heard of that." And it's part of like how the landscape works here. Also a very, very big country. But yes, these Acadie Lumina, night walk experiences are absolutely, phenomenal. You're completely immersed in Acadian culture. It's it's a world class thing. Which, and I mean, again, even now, I'm still having people come up to me saying, had never heard of that before. Amazing.
Mm-hmm. And you're introducing your readers to all of these amazing things, and also you. In a similar fashion, I'll just break away from the mag for a moment because you have Atlantic Edition with James Mullinger on YouTube, where you sit down with some really talented people from out east, and it makes me think of, like, that cover story kind of makes me think of an episode that you had where you had this woman who has like a beautiful beach view at her home. Yeah. And so she just decided that, well, I'm going to build a stage and we're going to have ballet dancers performing on that stage. What could be more beautiful than that? I mean, who thinks of something like that? That's brilliant. And you were all in on that.
Right. I mean, it was phenomenal. And again, the whole concept for them was born out of COVID. Like she is one of the co-founders of Atlantic Ballet of Canada. For years they've brought in, and just Atlantic Ballet of Canada itself is a story that not many people know here, that they've been operating for more than 20 years. They fly in ballet dancers from all over the world. I've been to shows before. I've watched the most beautiful ballet, and afterwards I'll get chatting to one of the dancers, and it's a guy from Newcastle in England with a northern accent. I'm expecting to hear something kind of Russian and elegant, or and instead I'm hearing this. So they decided very early on in the stages of COVID, how do we do safe shows? And it was like, well, we've got this space. And of course, just building a stage that is firm enough to be able to hold dancers doing all those things.
Yeah.
And I actually went back. I did the TV show with there 3 years ago. Yeah. And then went back there just as an audience member 3 weeks ago. And it was just like absolutely mind-blowing. You're sitting there just eating the best maritime seafood from a vineyard down the road, looking at the ocean and watching these world-class dancers. And it's an experience which, again, is completely unique. And this is one of the things that people don't always realize when they complain about their region's tourism or trying to get newcomers to come. It's like you've really got to think outside the box, and you've got to do something that literally you can't see that anywhere else in the world.
That's right, and just doubling down on beauty, bringing two beautiful environments together in the world of dance, and of course being on the beach and seeing the beauty that is Atlantic Canada. and just combining them. It's such a remarkable experience. What was it like to just sit there and witness this? Like, was it an out-of-body experience, or could you be in it given the backdrop?
Yeah, that's an interesting, very interesting question, because I guess that's always the case with situations like this, where you're often sat there too busy kind of going, this is amazing, to kind of, but it is that, but you are also enjoying it. I mean, so there were times your perspectives keep shifting. So you get brought a delicious plate of food, and so you kind of your senses are all taken up with that.
Yeah.
And then they introduce the next dance. So you're wowed with the dance, and then suddenly you notice behind two of the dancers, there's a ginormous yacht going by on the ocean, and then some rare bird flies over. So you are constantly looking at all, and then someone fills up your wine glass, you have another swig of that, and it's this constant, just like, but yes, yeah, you are. So you are throughout thinking this is phenomenal, but you are also, immersed in it to the extent that, like, I guess I equate it to like when you're watching an action movie and there's 50 things happening at once on screen.
Yeah.
But you're still able to kind of follow who's hitting who. I'm sure that's not how the ballet industry would describe it.
Leave it to you to make that comparison.
Darling,
that's great.
Ballet by the ocean. It's just like the Expendables.
Very good, very good. Hey, back to the bag. Coinciding with the Paris Olympics, the Maritime edit has a story of a victorious rowing crew from St. John. And I mean, I'm sure this was carefully planned, but I love the timing of this, because that's the big attraction for me with the Olympic Games. Is it's not so much the sports that they're competing in, it's about getting to know these people.
Totally. I mean, and that sense of pride that we all felt as Canadians when we saw all of those Canadian athletes on the boat. They seem to be one of the only boats that had also invited other countries onto their boat in classic Canadian fashion. and yeah, you're right. It is all of these stories and these inspiring stories of these kids that have, and they're so young, some of them, but who were obviously the first ones at the racetrack or the gym. And so for us, and again, I can't take credit for this in the respect that an amazing journalist by the name of Mark Basudio pitched it.
Yes.
And it's such an incredible story that the Paris crew competing in 1871, and meanwhile the statue, the memorial to the great race, the monument that celebrated it, is basically, if my windows were open, I'd be able to see it.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
really?
So the ginormous boat that is there with the names of all of those who competed, it's right outside. And for years, I walked past this thing, not knowing what it was. I'm like, what's that giant canoe doing in a piece of stone? What a pointless piece of it. Now I understand the legacy of it. So it just goes to show we don't always know what's happening on our own doorstep.
That's right. But in getting to know those that are participating, that have participated, and the history of a sport in your country and why it's so popular and why you feel the need to excel in said sport. You sat down with the CBC's Ian Hannamansing, who grew up in Sackville, Ontario, and you talked about New Brunswick. You compared notes amongst a lot of things that you guys did together, and a lot of the things that you would have discussed. You compared notes on New Brunswick.
Yes, yeah, and it's that thing where for him, he grew up in Sackville. He as he points out, he didn't look like other people there, but yet always felt welcomed. And it's very interesting how for him he kind of describes New Brunswick as an inherent part of who he was and who he is. His parents still live there, and I mean, I think what's interesting is that, as we mentioned before, sometimes there was a tendency by, for example, CBC doing features on people in the Maritimes about people who'd moved away. And we tried to kind of avoid that. But what's interesting with Ian is that obviously he still has family here in Sackville, but he also still makes New Brunswick such an enormous part of who he is. He's constantly kind of beating the drum for the Maritimes over on the West Coast. And he's kind of, and he's just such an interesting guy. And it's interesting that someone can be that likable and I mean, like yourself, where you can talk to anyone and you can bring anything out of anyone. You just got that personality and that skill set.
Thank you.
Where it doesn't there's a lot of interviews, and there's a lot of journalists, and there's a lot of hosts who can speak to a certain, a type of musician or a certain genre of artist. But yet people like yourself and in Hamlensing, you can speak to anyone, and that's a unique thing.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And by the way, I think I misspoke a moment ago when I said Sackville, Ontario. Of course, I meant Sackville, New Brunswick. I'm just Toronto-centric. Being here in Toronto.
I knew what you meant.
That's a fault of mine. And Ian Hamlensing has been on the show, and you talked about his book, and we talked about his book, Pandemic Spotlight, Canadian Doctors at the Front of the COVID-19 Fight. It's a great read for anybody that's interested in picking that up. Speaking of books, by the way, well covered and reviewed in the Maritime edit, especially in this issue, for summer reading, which I love. Have you made it your mission over the past decade to visit every independent bookstore in Atlantic Canada?
I have, and I did, or I thought I did, until I got an email last week from someone saying they run a children's bookstore called, and I should get the name right, so I'm going to quickly check it. I believe it was called Floozies. Does that sound right? Does Floozies?
Floozies?
Floozies. I'm going to check. I could be wrong on that. No, it's not Floozies. I take it back. Floozies means the same thing here in Canada as it does elsewhere. There is a children's bookstore in Halifax that wrote to me. Maybe it's called Poozies, something. Anyway,
something like that. Okay.
I will check. Anyone wants to message me to check this. But the owner wrote to me and said, loved the feature, but rather disappointed to not be mentioned. And of course, I wrote back and apologized and said that this will be rectified next time. But I did think I'd done them all. And I did everything I could within my research in that I sent it to so many people involved in the book industry and said, is there anything missing from this list?
Yeah.
But yes, I believe I visited them all. And I think it's one of those fascinating things where independent bookstores in small towns really thrive, whether they are selling new books or secondhand books. They've got books curated specifically for people that they know in the community. It's a magical thing. So and I love bookstores. I grew up going to them, and my dad, who's always dealt in secondhand books and travels around England setting up stalls at fairs and stuff. At book fairs. So it was super fun things to do. But yes, 10 years it took to build that feature, and I still missed one out.
That's all right. They reached out and they're included now. And that's the thing about bookstores, though. There is a feel to them. Like, when you go to like a record store, like back in the day when you go to a record store, even now when you go to like a used record store or a used CD store or whatever, and I miss those days of just flipping through. The hours I spent, James, I'm sure you did as well, just flipping through records and CDs and cassettes and looking for the ones you wanted. It's got to feel like it's a place where you can kind of congregate and talk about music, especially if they have listening stations then. And bookstores are kind of the same way. Comic book stores as well, where it's kind of like, hey, what are you reading? What do you like? What are you into? Oh, I should try that out. Bookstores have that feel as well.
That's it. And that's why I think the bookstores and comic book stores and record stores are coming back in such a big way, and the existing ones are thriving, because you can't replicate that online. And also, online now, especially with social media, it's all deciding what it wants you to see or what it thinks you want to see, but also crucially what people who are paying them want you to see. Whereas you go in a bookstore, you can scroll through Amazon and you're not really discovering things. You're seeing what the big money book publishers want you to see.
Yes. That's
Similarly
right.
with music, you're scrolling through. Whereas you go to a bookstore, it's completely natural and organic, and that kind of exploration is almost gone. I also equate it to, like, I still love, like, we don't have any newspapers barely left in Atlantic Canada now, but so I was in Maine last week, so I was basically buying every newspaper, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all of them, because the thing with a newspaper is that you sit and read what has been curated. Like, here's the front page, here's the second page, here's the third page. These are essentially in order of importance. Here's what you need to know about what's happening in the world. Whereas when I visit a website, whether it be the Guardian website or the Globe and Mail, whatever the website be, I'm basically going to the areas that I'm interested in. And really, so I might know everything that's happening in the culture world, but I don't know anything about what's happening with the war, or And
right.
and so to my mind, that it's that difference, it's that point of difference where social media is basically reflecting what you want to see, but with a newspaper or bookstore or record store, you get to hunt things out for yourself.
Well, that's kind of like what the magazine does, right? I mean, it might be the cover story that draws you in, but then you find 5 or 6 other things easily that you'll be talking to other people about.
Nice, yeah, no, it's a nice way of putting it, and I guess that's one of the things, the points of difference we're always trying to convey to people who, advertisers who do business with, start doing business with social media influencers and have discarded print. It's like, when they see an influencer do something, they know this person's just been paid to say that. Now, yes, lots of eyes might be on it, but are they engaged eyes? Are they invested eyes? And yeah, I would like to think that anyone that has gone to the trouble to subscribe to a magazine, have it mailed to them, they're opening up, and one of the compliments we always receive from people is that they read every page.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of, and I guess for us the challenge is, how do you keep up that level of quality so that people continue to say, I want to read every page. If it's in here, I need to know about it.
Yes, exactly. And the fact that it's a quarterly as well really builds up the anticipation
that's nice.
For the Maritime edit. So get the summer edition now. As far as James Mullinger on stage, you're going to be performing with singer-songwriter Ethan Ash tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday.
Yeah, no rest for the wicked.
No,
yeah.
That's amazing. So how did the two of you get together on a show?
Well, it's interesting. So he's amazing singer-songwriter. I was a fan of his music back in the UK. I'd seen him open for people like Ed Sheeran, and but we'd never met or connected. And then I'd moved here, and he was here doing basically kind of bar shows, pub shows in the area. Essentially, there was a fan of his that lived in New Brunswick who said, I'll put you up and get you some gigs.
Nice.
And once he was here, she said, oh, you should meet this other English guy. And we'd both heard of each other, but never met. So two people, he's from Cambridge, I'm from London, but we both ended up meeting in New Brunswick, did some shows together, and it's built up a thing. And he has a fan base of people who just want to see him, so he does solo shows. But we do these 2 shows together in this beautiful dome called it's in Yip Cidery on the Kingston Peninsula. Everyone has to take a ferry boat there. It's a ginormous dome. We get about 280 people packed into this thing.
Wow!
And it's insane because I'm there. I'll phone my friends in England and go, "How many people are on at the Comedy Store in Leicester Square tonight?" And they'll be like, "Oh, we've got an audience of about 160." And I'm like, "We've got 280 in the middle of nowhere." And it just feels like this experience for all of us. Like, it's amazing for us on stage, but it's amazing for the audience all sitting there together going, yeah, we've made a real effort to be here. We've driven, we've taken a ferry boat, we've driven through rural, middle of nowhere in New Brunswick to arrive at this dome just to laugh and sing and have fun. And it's the happiest, I get, really.
Yeah, and they're getting music, they're getting comedy. So how do you put on that kind of a show? Like, do you go on first and then he follows? Do you kind of take turns?
We've done that. Yeah, we've done that before. I mean, my preferred way and the way we do it is that, because obviously it's better for comedy when it's darker. So so I will go up and warm up the crowd, do 5 minutes, introduce him, and I'm up there in shorts and t-shirt. It's always sweltering heat in there. He'll go up and do 45 minutes to an hour, then we'll do an intermission, and then he'll introduce me. And then I'll get up and do an hour, hour and a half. And at this point, I kind of turn up. Even though we're in this boiling hot dome, I'll be fully suited with a bow tie, tuxedo. And it's, and it just, and then at the end, he comes on and we sing a song together. I can't sing, but I kind of rap/speak. And it's a song that we wrote together called the New Brunswick Song. Although one pivot we made 2 weeks ago was him and my son, Hunter, cooked up a plan that Hunter would introduce me. So Ethan gets up as I expect him to bring me up.
Yeah.
And he says, little surprise, James doesn't know. We've got James's son, Hunter Mullinger, to introduce him. And Hunter gets up and basically does like a 5-minute roast of me.
Really? He did?
The house down.
Wow.
Yeah,
how old is Hunter?
How
old is Hunter?
13 years old.
13, and he got up on stage and roasted you?
Full on roast, like really good stuff.
Wow.
And and all stuff that, again, obviously, if I'd have any say in it, I wouldn't have let him tell people that, Tim Horton's sausage wraps make me fart. I mean, things like that I would have said don't do. And now it's out there.
Well, between like your wife and your offspring, You clearly are not the most talented Mullinger I could be talking to right now.
Well, absolutely right, and that's why I'm not letting you anywhere near them, because if I do, you'll cast me out forever, Jeff.
I'm not going to talk to you every couple of months. I'm going to get on another Mullinger. How's your podcast, Mullinger's Weekly Ramble? How's that going? How are you enjoying it?
Wonderful. I mean, I absolutely love it. I didn't know what it was going to be like, and I think I mentioned to you that I did one before where I would interview people. But as you know, I mean, it's so much work logistically lining people up.
Yes.
And then
it takes time.
and all of those things.
Yep.
So when the producers came back to me and said, do you have another idea for a podcast? I just thought, well, how about one where I can record it wherever I am in the world? And as long as I've sent it into them by midnight on a Tuesday, it's done. So I go on the road. I take my blue snowball here, and just sit there and ramble. And I have a bit of a plan in that. Well, people send in questions which I answer.
Yeah.
And I have a policy of I will answer anything, no matter how personal. So people, they go hell for leather with that one. And I'll just go through what I've been doing during the week. And it really does become a ramble. And I guess what I found interesting and useful is going back to what I was saying at the beginning about being, somewhat isolated. I mean, we do things, but it's not like having office banter where you're going in and chatting to people. So often I'll watch a movie like the new Beverly Hills Cop movie. You watch it, and you might bore your family with a couple of notes about it, but they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
So I can just sit and ramble it all into a microphone, and I thought that it would be harder than it was, but I'm actually having to kind of fight to keep it under an hour. And it's just me sitting there talking to myself. I mean, tell me that's not a sign of madness.
Well, when you're talking to such an interesting person, there's so much to say. Check out jamesmullinger.com, the podcast Mullinger's Weekly Ramble, maritimeedit.com. James Mullinger, it's always a pleasure, man. You're one of my favorite people on the planet, and it's great to catch up with you. Thanks, pal.
Thank you, brother. It means a lot. Can't wait for next time. And it's me, not Hunter or Pam.
All right. Me. Okay, good. All right. Thanks for the warning. I won't ask. There is James Mullinger.